Hey everyone, welcome to Sociastrology. Today we're going to take a look at the month of February 2025 and see how this can be expected to play out for us personally as well as geopolitically and socially. And then we'll take it through the signs to see what parts of your chart are getting highlighted this period of time as well. So before we do all of that, we will look back on January a bit. I'm actually really looking at the end of this month as pretty significant. So, of course, we can't look back over the predictions for the end of the month yet, but I'm looking forward to doing that in the March video. So, we'll take a look at what has happened so far, what we expected to play out, what did play out, and then we will dive fully into February. Before we begin, I do just want to quickly point out that I am still running the Chart Your Destiny giveaway. So if you're interested in entering for a free natal chart reading, all you have to do is make sure that you're subscribed, give the video a thumbs up, and then leave a comment below with your zodiac sign or your favorite natal placement. And that will enter you for a chance to win, and I will announce the winner on March 1st. So with all of that said, let's dive into it. So for January 2025, of course, the most significant event that we had was the inauguration day. I think we can all agree. So I have that chart up here again. I did do a whole video just over the inauguration and what it portends for the coming 4 years of the Trump administration. However, throughout the month, this is generally what we expected to occur. Increased attacks. We saw that early in the month when we had the opposition between Pluto and Mars at its closest. So that's basically what we were expecting. Land grabs and nationalism. I certainly expected this, but not quite on the public level of how this wound up playing out. So, everything that's going on with Greenland and Panama and the whole weird Gulf of America thing that's going on. I didn't quite expect it on that level. However, we have also seen this play out in different parts of the world as well, unfortunately. And a lot of that had to do with the Mars in Cancer that is in a really significant retrograde motion here. So it's not just that Mars is in Cancer, it's that it's going through this whole cycle with that retrograde, opposing that Pluto. The way that I saw that was just there's going to be some sort of nationalistic fervor leading leaders to try and grab onto that in order to then stake claims on other lands. And actually, it's funny because that opposition happens, of course, with Pluto in Aquarius there. And that does have a lot to do with that kind of tech pioneering and things like this. And of course, we've heard increased rhetoric now about like planting the American flag on Mars and so on and so forth. So it's much broader even than we were expecting with that. Also, geopolitical surprises, other disclosures later in the month. This is what I'm looking toward in this last week here. So we're going to have to review this in March and see how that winds up playing out. Of course, we've seen some of this little murmurs of this coming up, the US-Danish kind of relationship going a little bit wonky and sideways, the way that Europe is trying to grapple with the new administration and everything. But I don't think that has quite hit yet. I think we're going to see that in this last week. We also were expecting more leadership changes. And of course, we have seen that play out now with Canada, with Trudeau saying that he's going to resign when the party is able to pick a new leader. And additionally, ego conflict arising. Musk has really been playing out a lot of the politics, recently the astrological politics, as well as, on the world stage. But yeah, there's been a lot of ego conflicts arising between him and multiple different political speakers and even people who aren't super into politics. It's just been blowing up really big around him. Not to mention, I do think that part of the reason of the timing of Trudeau resigning probably has a lot to do with the fact that he doesn't, and I hate to like Americanize Canadian politics. I realize like there's been years that have been playing into this, and there's a whole dynamic up there as well. But I can't help but feel like he really doesn't want to have to deal with Trump. You know, I think that he actually genuinely just doesn't want to deal with this anymore. So I think that that also winds up playing into that too. And then we also saw that with the full moon in Cancer, that during that full moon, Pluto was angular at the time of the full moon under Gaza specifically. So it was catching that very edge there and going straight over or straight under really Gaza. And so definitely some major impactful power plays or intensity going on there. And of course, we saw, you know, whenever a ceasefire is mentioned, there's always an increase then in the intensity of the bombing. And then heartbreakingly, when I was kind of going back through this, you know, I almost like hate to mention, but they're currently now going through the rubble. And there's, of course, numbers that are going to come out that are a lot more accurate, but there's also just, you know, thinking about the experience of going through all of that and seeing what is in the rubble of these buildings that have, you know, almost all been completely destroyed is just truly a Pluto right on the Imam Cooley kind of a feeling there. I also can't help but worry that there's more that I was thinking through today that we were expecting for this month that I didn't get on this slide. But one of the things that was arising was this feeling of a bait and switch as Mercury was coming into sextile Saturn and Venus in Pisces from Capricorn. It looked like it was going to sextile Venus first, but then it in reality was going to wind up sextiling Saturn first and then Venus. And it just looked to me like some kind of a sugar coating or a bait and switch. And of course, I can't help but feel like that may wind up tying in somehow to the way that things wind up playing out going forward for Gaza. You know, naturally, I can't help but not really trust a ceasefire. Then additionally, one of the things that I was expecting based on, again, the angularity of the moon, again, that full moon with where Pluto was on the Imam Cooley for Gaza, I was expecting for there to be a lot of news about Indonesia coming up. And of course, there has been just an absolute ton. They've like it's been nonstop news. For one thing, of course, they're pushing forward, and there's been some major steps and like calculations around. They're planning to move the capital, and this has been a plan for a little while, but it's just like kind of kicking into another gear right now. Additionally, they joined BRICS as a full member suddenly. And so that was really, really huge news. And then additionally, now Trump has been hinting at that there's some plan to, you know, ethnically cleanse Gaza by sending the people from there to Indonesia. You know, nonsensically, of course, in complete contradiction to international law, to Indonesia. So now getting them sucked into this whole situation. And so that really coming through with that full moon makes a lot of sense as well. Not to mention that this, you know, full moon was in Cancer. It was hitting up this Mars in Cancer. We have Saturn in Pisces. So I was expecting water problems, water troubles. And of course, we had, there was a big landslide as well around that full moon in Indonesia as well. So that came up quite a bit. But coming back to the concept of like sugarcoating and bait and switch, this wound up playing out in a couple different ways. Of course, there was the whole sugarcoating of AFD by Musk, although is it really sugarcoating if it's Musk? I think at this point, after the inauguration day, any semblance of a mask that was there for him is now off. But then additionally, it kind of felt like a bait and switch with having all of the MAGA people come to Washington and then not telling them until last minute, even though the weather report was always available, the forecast was known, that they were going to not be able to be at the inauguration and just being left out in the cold. That does really feel like a Mercury and Capricorn looking like it's going to be sextiling Venus and like this fun thing that they were going to do, and then actually being in a sextile to Saturn there first, like out in the cold there. So then, of course, additionally, with the conjunction during Inauguration Day of the Sun and Pluto in Aquarius there, we were expecting a rise in the importance, the significance, the power of the tech billionaire class within the context of the Trump administration. But additionally, this was at even a more stark or sharp visual level than I was even expecting, where, usually these things go on behind the scenes, and yet it was specifically all of those tech billionaires that had better seats even than the cabinet members at the inauguration, even though all of the supporters, the everyday people, were then shut out. So that was kind of ridiculously in stark relief there again, on a level where I should have expected with the sun right there that this would just be front and center, but I'm still not used to politicians not pulling the punches, so we're going to have to continue, I think, to get used to that now. Not to mention, we were expecting some clarity around the power dynamics and networks of control that also came through around Inauguration Day as well, in addition with the Musk incident. Additionally, with Venus moving into Pisces, we were also expecting for relief efforts or like unity and solidarity to be visible as well. And of course, we saw that in Los Angeles with the fires, that kind of outpouring of support globally. Now, additionally, in terms of the angularity of that full moon, of course, it was also angular over DC. We had the inauguration. Additionally, it was angular over Japan, which formally inaugurated an independent mission to NATO. And we were expecting also increased agreements, especially with regard to like authority and cooperation. And Japan also then agreed to increase defense ties with Indonesia. So pulling both Indonesia and Japan together there. And that was that same line. I can't remember if it was rising or setting or what was happening there, but that was they were on the same angles over Indonesia and Japan there. So it makes sense that they would have come together a little bit more. Although it is interesting to see those ties get closer in the same period of time that Indonesia joins BRICS. Of course, that's we're going to have to see how that winds up playing out in coming years. Also, Venezuela, Maduro was sworn in. Romania, there were protests, tens of thousands over the annulled election in Bucharest. Also, Romania and Bulgaria. It was also angular over Bulgaria. Both of them became Schengen members officially. Like that agreement was put into place, or put into action, rather, I should say. Like they are full Schengen members, and now the borders are treated differently now. Additionally, in Bulgaria, the cabinet was approved after like months of going back and forth on that. It was also angular over Ukraine and Belarus. Belarus is about to have their election. And then in Ukraine, of course, there's issues arising due to the U.S. administration change and what we are expecting to play out there, changes for Ukraine. Okay, so that'll be the recap. Let's look finally now fully at February here. So yeah, this looks like an interesting month. We're starting to get into the heavy Pisces season where we're going to have a pile up there, especially right at the end of the month with the new moon in Pisces. So we should see a lot of dynamic tension. There's going to be like a lot of news, a lot of pushing and pulling and maneuvering throughout this period of time. For sure, bold shifts. Also, inspired starts to things. One thing that we're going to see playing out here quite a bit is that as Mars stays in this general area, we saw some of this in January too, it'll be staying in this kind of general area. It's going to be in a sextile, generally speaking, with Uranus, and then with a whole plethora of planets that wind up going through this last bit of Pisces here too. So that's going to play into a lot of the dynamic pushes and pulls that we see playing out. Certain things are going to go straight into place really quickly, faster than expected. However, we do also then still have this square to Jupiter, and Jupiter is going to be ruling everything that is playing out in Pisces, which is going to be a lot. So it's going to be very dynamic. There will be good news. Don't just expect for this to be like, okay, they're just going to get everything that they want and like things are going to go wonky for like all sorts of different countries. There will be good things happening across the board. There's also going to be some rough things that are going to require some pushback. And remember, that's the name of the game for the whole year, as we discussed in the year ahead video as well. This is going to require active participation, active input from all different sides here, because the energy is going to be shifting. And that's something we'll also see allusions to in this month as well. So yeah, on a personal level, creative breakthroughs, we can make some practical progress at different points in this month as well. There will be a major energy of unpredictability, however. Uranus is super involved in this upcoming month, so we don't want to take our eye off of that. It's in one of its last pushes through Taurus, so it's a weird Uranus, but it's going to be very active, and it's been playing out, again, in both good and rough ways in the past year and a half, 2 years, in terms of the political arena, and for the rest of us, bringing a lot of really interesting insights about what's actually important to us. So I would definitely expect the unexpected as usual, and we will definitely need to be adaptable throughout this month too. And there will be, like I was mentioning, kind of an oscillation throughout this month, and that's going to be between idealism, this big picture thinking, as we get a ton of Pisces energy into the mix, but then also requiring some grounding, as Saturn is going to be ruling the Sun and Mercury throughout the beginning of the month, as they are in Aquarius as well. So yeah, push and pull, ebb and flow. There's going to be moments that we should seize on. There's going to be moments where we should kind of just see how things play out. So let's look at this week by week. So first off, I want to point out, just generally speaking, this is what we're looking at the most here, is the fact that we've got a lot of Aquarius and Pisces stuff going on right now. So this gives the month, of course, a flavor of that forward-looking, big, grand vision. What's the solution? How can we make sure that everyone is included in our plans? How can we connect more with people? How can we connect more with community? How can we make sure that everyone is taken care of around us? That's going to be a lot of the flavor for us all personally. And then additionally, right on the first of the month, we have Venus conjoining Neptune here. So this is really pleasant and sweet. On a personal level, it will bring about that really intense idealism of Pisces, bring that straight to the fore, amplifying compassion, amplifying creativity. However, with all of this here, this is such rose-colored glasses kind of energy here. So that's what we want to look out for, is any sort of illusions. And additionally, when it comes to finances, because Venus is not just related to relationships and how we connect with people socially or romantically, it is also finance. So that's something that we want to keep an eye on and make sure that we're not making any sort of impractical decisions. Now, on the collective level, this should, again, increase the focus on compassion as well as artistic breakthroughs and expression, spiritual connection, things like this. But then on a global level, this can bring about those themes of unity and escapism within the context of media and politics. And I would definitely watch for any sort of interesting scandals or deceptions that wind up arising in finances or entertainment, politics, and so on. So we do have a bit more of a sugarcoating here, but it's almost like, rather than just a sugarcoating, it is some sort of like mind-altering substance coating. It's very delusional. So that's something that we're going to need to keep our eye open for. Then on the heels of that, Venus is going to continue coming through and it will conjoin the North Node here in Pisces. This is weirdly beautiful. Venus exalts in Pisces, so it's thrilled to be there. Again, it can be way over idealistic, but for those who have been acting compassionately, who have been acting unselfishly, who have been romanticizing their life and that of those around them in the sense of really wanting to do the right thing for the sake of it, really wanting to behave in a moral manner, again, for the sake of it. This should be really nice. There could actually be some really pleasant reward, so to say, coming through with that, even if it's in the sense of just feeling really nice and good. We could also see for sure some really fateful connections with people, aligning people who have similar attitudes about things, especially, again, those who are highly compassionate, running into like-minded, like-hearted individuals, and then collaborating along those lines. And we could also then see some treaties or alliances or associations along those lines of shared goals. So there's a shift toward values that resonate with cooperation and harmony throughout this period of time. Now, as if that were not enough for this day, also on the 3rd, we have then Mercury trines Jupiter. And what's really interesting and nice about this is that Mercury is ruling Jupiter as long as Jupiter is in Gemini. But Jupiter is ruling all of these placements here, including Saturn, and Saturn's ruling Mercury. So low-key, these are all in each other's placements. The squares from Jupiter are all now separating. Plus we have this nice trine. So there's an interesting level of agreement along these lines. So this could be really optimistic. Definitely big picture thinking. What we're talking about here is Mercury in Aquarius, which even though it may focus in on details here and there, it is still trying to support the really big vision of Jupiter, which is in its sign. And it's very forward thinking in terms of the plans that it wants to make. It wants to push things forward. It wants to advance what hasn't yet happened. And so there could be also throughout this period of time, like very fruitful conversations, really like broad-minded discussions, positive communication, agreement, diplomacy, expansive ideas in policy or education. Looking at the world, I am certainly shy to say progressive specifically. It is Aquarius, and it may look on the face of it like something that is being proposed is somehow progressive or like it's pushing things forward, but it's kind of like, if you're familiar with transhumanism, it's like, yeah, that would be pushing things forward, but is it really, so we could see some of that, kind of like techno-utopianism baked into this with the Pisces, the Aquarius, that Jupiter and Gemini there in the mix. So something to keep your eye open for. It might just be like a really cool conversation, cool ideas and so forth, but is it really good? Not quite sure yet. Now, on the heels of that, on the 4th, then we have Venus moving into Aries. Venus is not super fond of being in Aries. It's an environment that is not conducive to its natural qualities, typically focused on creating comfort, creating harmony, creating connections, and so on, creating beauty. Whereas in Aries, it's more about straightforwardly pioneering, pushing things forward, a specific vision, a specific idea that comes on as an urge and is acted on kind of in the same moment there. So the way that this typically plays out is through that kind of boldness, that like passion within relationships, being willing to just like say what you want, put yourself out there. If other people get on board, great. If they don't, that's cool. Hopefully, so sometimes this can be a little bit of pushing ideals, pushing ideas, pushing values onto others. So that's something that we should on a personal level avoid. We may see that play out, but I don't think that is absolutely necessary with Venus and Aries here. So you may feel that you are more confident or assertive when it comes to pursuing what you desire. There's also then a focus on and a kind of holding up of, or like an idealization or romanticization of individualism and trailblazing. And we could see this play out in the sense of like art or values or finance, as well as in diplomacy. And this Venus in Neptune is interesting because of the fact that it's giving us a little bit of a sneak peek of Neptune in Aries, which we're going to get right at the end of March. And what also is interesting about this Venus is that, so it comes through, right? It conjoins Neptune and Pisces. This is lovely. It's beautiful. It's romantic, you know. It goes forward to about 9 degrees of Aries, and then it goes into its retrograde cycle. Now, Neptune is going to be right at the end of Pisces, even more so than it already is, and it's going to pass it again in Pisces there. It's going to then station direct, and by the time it hits Neptune again, Neptune's going to be in that first degree of Aries. So Venus and Neptune are going to conjoin in Pisces twice, but then it's going to conjoin that Neptune in Aries as well. So Venus into Aries. On the 4th, we're starting to get a vision, a kind of micro level of what we can expect from Neptune on a huge, broad level, starting this year and continuing until 2039. Now, then finally, we wind up with Jupiter going direct on the same day. This is also really excellent because then as we have even more planets start to move into Pisces, the ruler of all of those planets then is not in that retrograde motion. It's able to move direct. It's able to release a lot of what it has been collecting and rethinking and reevaluating, reconsidering agreements and conclusions that have been held up for the past several months. It can start to release those again as it starts to move direct. So we should see renewed growth and expansion with Jupiter going direct, especially in the area of our charts where this is playing out, and especially in areas where you've been facing weird delays. And maybe these delays haven't been experienced as just straightforward, like obnoxious roadblocks, but it's like, why can't I get this moving? Why can't I get this moving? It doesn't feel like there's something in the way, but I just can't get it going. That's the kind of delay that we can expect to be released around this period of time as Jupiter starts to go direct. So forward momentum in social progress and opportunities as well. That Jupiter has been retrograde since before the election. And then on a global level, we also see economic and ideological growth resuming. So we could see unexpected ideologies that have gone kind of quiet in recent months. We could see a big push and a big like realignment of that to push us forward then as well. Now, the reason that this is tied so strongly into ideas, it is Jupiter, which has to do with, you know, philosophy and knowledge and so on and so forth, belief. But it's in Gemini. So it's dealing with day-to-day questions, you know. So this is impacting those big questions pretty much across the board. Now, there's a few little alignments arising toward the end of the week that have to do with the moon and where that's moving through. So it will move through Aries here. And then as it's in Taurus, it's going to start to make connections again. So it'll square the Sun and Mercury here, but then it will also create a minor grand trine like this alignment here. It's going to create that with Mars and Saturn. So it's playing into this even before it conjoins Uranus, though it will go through that area as well. And so we should be able to, if there's certain areas with regard to our goals, our drive, what's pushing us, what's motivating us, the structures that we have in our lives, the realities that we then have to align that with. There's a desire to make a change along those lines. And there's also an opportunity to make a change along those lines on the 5th of February It's going to feel tense, though. It's going to feel more like an urge to make a change. So I would check in and make sure that that's something that you've been wanting for a period of time, and it's not just an impulsive thing, because that can also raise that sense of impulse to make a change that maybe looking back might not have been so great. Now, as the moon starts to move into Gemini, then in the early degrees here, it's going to make a minor grand trine. Again, this same kind of formation from Gemini to Pluto in Aquarius, and then over to Venus, which is going to be in Aries at that point. And so this should help to clarify how we feel about relationships or emotional connections that we have, either with other people or with ourselves, just how we're feeling about our life and the sense of power and control over our own life that we feel that we have. There may be a bit of an impulse to make a change there, but it's not going to be quite as strong as the day before, when the moon was going over that Uranus and hitting up Mars and Saturn there. So rather than necessarily creating like a structure within to function and to move that is feeling more liberated, now we're really checking into how we're feeling about things and whether we're comfortable with that. And if there need to be any changes made along those lines, then as the moon comes to Jupiter, that should also be possible, or we should see how that could be possible and some practical steps to make along those lines. So with that said, let's look at the following week of the 8th of February through the 14th. So finally, on the 9th of Sunday, we have Mercury conjoining the Sun. So this should bring some clarity in communication, in writing, self-expression, problem solving, education, learning. There should just be an ability to understand things a lot more smoothly on this day, as well as a focus on information sharing and intellectual pursuits and so forth. Also on the 9th, we have the moon will be conjoined to Mars here, and these two will be trine to Saturn. So the moon is coming through here as this aspect perfects. So this is bringing a lot of determination and disciplined action. There could be some emotional courage that is needed to push through with regard to practical goals. So a kind of emotional determination and emotional courage that comes in on this day. This is also helpful to leadership to get projects moving forward. So we could see that globally, collectively, on a cooperative level, and then also on a personal level. On the following day, we have the square perfecting between the Sun and Mercury in Aquarius and Uranus in Taurus. So this is going to be somewhat disruptive on this day. There could be disruptions in plans, but then also some major insights, as well as unpredictable shifts taking place throughout this day, especially when it comes to communication. So there could even be then sudden announcements or breakthroughs. This could even, though, play out as something becoming clear. The fact that something might even be untenable becoming clear. So there's a square here, and this is the Sun and Mercury. So it could even be information coming to light, coming out of the blue, or even something that you've maybe suspected, but it's like, okay, now it's clear. I'm not comfortable with this, and therefore maybe wanting to make some changes along those lines as well. I don't think that the changes would actually be made on that day necessarily, but something's becoming clear here. Additionally, on this day, then we have the opposition between the moon and Pluto will be sextile to Venus, and the moon will be trine to Venus. So this is what we call a wedge, and it brings about a lot of emotional intensity. We should, however, be able to connect with people to soften the edges of whatever is bringing up this intense emotion. So there could even be an ability to connect with others on a level that isn't typically there, and could even wind up transforming a relationship. And this somehow centering around power struggles, reconciliation efforts, and not necessarily within the context of the same relationship. This could play out as a series of things among different relationships where the emotional connection and consideration becomes clear in one area where it's very unclear in another. Now, lastly, I do want to point out that Mercury is going to be moving into Pisces on the 14th. Now, Mercury doesn't like to be in Pisces. It's, again, not an environment in which Mercury is the most comfortable. Again, not that Venus can't do interesting things in Aries or that Mercury can't do interesting things in Pisces. It's definitely the case that they can. However, it's not as straightforward. The information is a little bit more muddled. It needs to be felt through rather than thought through. So this does heighten intuition, imaginative thinking, creative thinking. There's a focus on compassionate communication, so being there for people. This is also, Mercury in Pisces can definitely lend itself to listening more than talking. So being a good listener throughout this period of time should be pretty helpful. And you should also be able to find that in someone else if that's something that you're needing during that time too. But it also brings about new narratives around art and humanitarian considerations and so forth. So while it's been moving through the humanitarian sign of Aquarius, it may have been collecting up some thoughts, some ideas, some plans, and then coming into Pisces that can help to round those out and to look at that from a different perspective. The ultimate motivations of Aquarius and Pisces, this is part of why I was pointing out in the beginning here that we have a lot here. There's a lot of interesting overlap between these signs because they're the last two signs of the zodiac. They're very broad-minded, but in quite different ways. So a lot of the goals of Aquarius and Pisces are similar. It's just that the way that one goes about it with Aquarius or Pisces is very different. With Aquarius, it's a lot more straightforward. It's a lot more fixed on a specific outcome. In Pisces, it's more that it's focused on a given feeling or a given moral, a given sentiment or state of being that is being driven at. And so that's the goal, and how it goes about it is completely indirect. Whereas in Aquarius, it is very direct. But there's a lot of agreement between the two of them in terms of taking that big forward-thinking perspective. So a lot of the ideas that have been being worked out with Mercury and Aquarius are now becoming more creative but less straightforward than they have been in the past month or so. So with all of that said, let's look at the full moon in Leo that we have on the 12th of February here. So this is part of why I was saying we can't take our eye off of Uranus this month, because this full moon in Leo is almost exactly square to that Uranus there. So this is going to play out pretty sharply in our own charts. Mercury hasn't quite changed signs yet. I jumped ahead to mention that. So this is extraordinarily electric. It's idea-based. It's highly intellectualized, but it's also going to bring up a lot of dynamics of the interplay between individual and collective. And there's a lot of then disruption that winds up arising through that opposition because it's releasing through this Uranus and Taurus. These are all fixed signs. So one thing that I would caution about around this time is that there can be a major increase in stubbornness and fixity. So try to keep in mind that just because one has a very specific plan, an idea of how something's going to play out, doesn't mean that it will play out that way. And that's where that lesson of Uranus is going to come in. That's how Uranus winds up playing out in fixed signs, is that it points out the futility of that, because Uranus can just completely disrupt something. Be like, okay, well, you had a plan and now what, And so that's something that I would caution about during this period of time, because that's likely to trigger a reaction from that Uranus's fixity. So with this full moon, there is a call to balance between personal expression and collective responsibilities. There can be some major unexpected changes that test your ideas around that, as well as your emotional resilience, with this being a full moon here. So we could see a kind of dramatic culmination of social initiatives or creative initiatives, expressive initiatives that could spill out into the public as well. And in terms of a global impact, we could totally see protests or major moments arising, like socially significant moments that kind of erupt during this period of time as well. So, as I mentioned here, you may feel torn between standing out as an individual and then adapting to sudden shifts in group dynamics or social expectations, even societal expectations. And so in those moments, authenticity is important here. We shouldn't just move away from that just because it's a heightened energy. It's going to be out of balance for sure. It's just that anywhere along the edges of that where we can be flexible, it would be wise in order to just make a little bit of room for others to also be themselves within that space if you're interacting with others around this time. So you could certainly use this energy to like showcase talents or adapt to changes, you know. But then on the other hand, if there are then impulsive reactions that come out or highly dramatic reactions that come out, can create conflict. So that's something that we'll want to keep in mind here as well. Now, on a collective or global level here, this does bring through power imbalances and an awareness of that. So it brings that to the fore, and it can lead to calls for reform in social movements, political circles, and so forth. So we could even see a leader emerging through whatever this is as well. But there is an opportunity for bold action toward collective progress. But it's going to require overcoming resistance or disruptions. And additionally, again, we always need to keep in mind, this isn't just playing out for one side, maybe an ideological side that we agree with. It's playing out across the board. So there could even then be action toward collective goals that we don't agree with, that we might not put in such like flowery language, that is calling for us to push back against, calling for us to see if there's a way that we can disrupt it. Not only different ideological sides, but different countries. So this will take on a lot of different faces throughout this period of time too. So in terms of any protest movements or major shifts in leadership that arise during this time, they're likely to be cultural milestones or political milestones. And we're likely to see themes of liberation versus tradition, or liberation versus authority or leadership dominating the headlines around this period of time too. And we could even see some unexpected events, or like, again, things that start one way and then they take a sharp, dramatic turn, probably same day, maybe next day, just around this period of time. Things are throughout this few months, not as they appear anyway, but this is a heightened example of it. So we're likely to see things in kind of quick motion around, they start one way and then they take a sharp turn. And given the Aquarian energy here, absolutely, we could see some technological advances that are kind of not anticipated or like explode out onto the scene in some way that winds up capturing the attention. And then additionally, if we look at this a little bit closer too, we have that minor grand trine still playing out between Mars, Saturn, Uranus here. We've got this stuff in Pisces. These two are getting really close to conjoining, Saturn and Neptune. We'll talk about that very soon. We also have coming up pretty quickly, I'm going to mention it in here, but I'm going to do a whole other video on this too, the conjunction of the North Node and Neptune in Pisces here. So this is pretty much already in full effect by mid-February. We have this newly direct Jupiter going on here. I expect a lot of really dynamic discourse, and especially when it comes to DC, hidden actions around fact and falsity. So again, like I was saying, in the year ahead, this looks like a period of time where there's almost this kind of desire to believe on the part of some things that may not be true. And so there could be a lot of discourse around that publicly, but in terms of the US and our politics over DC specifically, this is playing out in the 12th, 2nd, and 4th houses at the moment of that full moon. And so there could be a difficulty in seeing things. These are all like, this can be kind of needing to dig deep to actually get at what's going on here. And then the 2nd and 12th houses are things that tend to be a little bit difficult to ascertain just straightforwardly. So there could even be some things going on behind the scenes, especially with regard to DC around this time. Also, I don't love this in terms of physical structures. So we have that T-square to Uranus in Taurus here, and then that minor grand trine also still playing out between Saturn, which is getting close to, it's basically within orb of Neptune at this point. Neptune tends to dissolve things. Saturn is structure. It's also then in an easy relationship with Mars, and easy doesn't necessarily mean good. It can mean like, okay, there's a problem, and it was weirdly easy for that problem to just like take down a structure or something like that. And then the fact that Uranus is also at the apex of that. So it's at the apex of both of these triangles here, as you can see. So I would not be surprised to see some structural physical problems around this time too. And now this one is going to be angular over Russia. Full disclosure, when it comes to Russia, I don't claim it as being over Russia unless it's pretty close to Moscow. It's a huge expanse. And so things that are, going on over to the east or whatnot, almost everything would catch over Russia, if not for just narrowing it on Moscow pretty much. So this one's really, really close to angular over Moscow. It's then going down over the Caspian, across Iran. It's clipping Oman. It's also going to be angular over central US and Canada. It's hitting the exact central states in the US. And then in Mexico, this one, if I'm remembering correctly, is relatively close to Mexico City. If I'm remembering correctly, both of the luminations are for Mexico this year too. And then Greenland, this one's getting pretty close to Nuuk, so we'll have to see how that winds up playing out too. And then this one's also angular over Papua New Guinea, but it's pretty much dodging everything else that's around that. So these could be areas that we wind up seeing coming up, major things around these matters arising within these areas too. And yeah, that's pretty much what I wanted to say about that one. Now, moving forward, a few days later then, on the 16th of February, we have a pretty wide T-square between Venus, Mars, and the moon. Reason I'm mentioning it, I wouldn't normally take something that's this wide, is that Venus and Mars are not going to go exact on this square for a while. Venus is about to turn retrograde. So we are getting, though, around the middle of February, about as close as we're going to get, and it's basically in effect around this point. It's getting pretty close to like 8 degrees at its height this time. And what's interesting, though, about the T-square with the moon is that then they're all in each other's signs. So the moon is in Venus's sign, Venus is in Mars' sign, and Mars is in the moon's sign. And so I would not be surprised to see this play out more than we're expecting it to, just on the face of it. They're definitely in communication with each other, even though they're not exact in their aspect there. So yeah, I would expect for this to play out in terms of an emotional or relational tension. There could be a heightening of energy that requires an emotional balance, like an active attempt to emotionally regulate. And there can be a struggle to kind of harmonize assertiveness with the emotional needs of oneself and of others as well. And then on a global level, we could see some increase in tensions or like passionate efforts to kind of address certain issues with that moon in Libra, speaking to trying to harmonize things, trying to bring diplomacy to a situation. Then on the 18th, of course, the sun goes into Pisces and we enter Pisces season. So we're really starting to get a pile up here. There's a lot of Pisces going on right now. So if you are a creative type, I would say that this is probably quite welcome. This can help to that end, but this can also really bring up emotions, especially where concerns things that are happening to others. So if you are the kind of person, and I am very envious of you, if not, I have too much Pisces going on, that you're able to kind of distance yourself from what's happening to other people. You may feel a flood of emotions about this. You may feel like the things that are hitting other people are having a greater impact on your ability to function. In those cases, just take it from someone with a lot of Pisces. You will need to try to create those emotional boundaries there so that you can function. This is our structure. It's our imagination, our ability to tune into culture. This is big questions of what's important in terms of values, significant events, and things like this. It's our thought processes and it's our identity that are getting subsumed within the kind of depths of the collective here. So you'll need to do your best to try to establish those boundaries. If that's something that winds up arising pretty sharply, we'll probably see that a little bit more as Venus winds up moving back into Pisces much later on, toward the end of March there. But one of the best ways to utilize Pisces energy is to romanticize things. So even when it comes to like Stoicism and things like this, Stoicism can really romanticize things quite a bit. It can be looking at things as they are and accepting them as, well, this is reality, and reality, no matter how lovely or unpleasant it may be, is beautiful because it is reality and because of the absolute improbability of the universe that we exist in, so on and so forth. I think this is probably part of why Pisces tends to go so big this way, is because otherwise this becomes actually very heavy. It becomes like the oceanic depths rather than just, universalizing itself out of the depths and into the everything, So that's one of the best ways to deal with a major pileup like we're going to be dealing with in Pisces throughout this period of time. Additionally, if you are able to contribute to something, anything, that can also give this energy a way to express so that it feels a little bit less of a weight on your soul, which can, without a doubt, wind up then impacting your ability to function. And we don't need that, So something to keep in mind around this time in this Pisces season, which is especially strong this year. And then, of course, as if that were not enough, then right on the heels of this, the moon winds up moving into Scorpio, and Mars and Saturn here are still in pretty close orb. They're only a little over 2 degrees off from each other, about 2.5 degrees. And so the moon will be coming through and it'll be making a pretty tight grand trine there. So that determination of will, that intensity of purpose that we can feel with a trine between Mars and Saturn, which is already highly emotionally driven and idealized in the signs of Cancer and Pisces there, it's getting even more emotionally driven by that moon in Scorpio here. And that moon in Scorpio is, of course, ruled by Mars. Mars is ruled by that moon. So these two will be in mutual reception throughout this. So yeah, later, a little bit beyond the half point of the month, things get really emotionally deep potentially emotionally heavy and melancholic. If it goes in that direction, try to romanticize your way out of it. This is how Pisceans generally find some level of functionality within the world, is to just accept, allow, move forward, allow things to ebb and to flow, and let those emotions just like come and go as they can. Holding on to the emotions, it's just going to become too much to have to try and keep up with. So yeah, try your best to temper that emotion. Don't suppress it, but just allow it to flow, allow it to carry forth. Try not to necessarily act on it within the context of relationships, because it's likely that that's going to get really emotionally complicated. We are dealing with two malefics here, Mars and Saturn. They can complicate things. And then that mutual reception between the moon and Scorpio, which itself is pretty heavy, and then Mars not liking to be in Cancer, that could get just so complicated if you wind up expressing this through any sort of tension within a relationship. So just something to kind of keep in mind. Utilizing this toward a creative project, absolutely brilliant. Then you have a ton of determination toward that end. And a desire to see something really quite perfected, but not in an overproduced kind of a way, with that Saturn being in Pisces. Then on the heels of this, we get an interesting, pretty cool square. I'm shy to say that I'm looking forward to this, because it's definitely going to be hitting up my chart, but it's interesting. It'll be a time to do some thinking. So we wind up with Mercury in Pisces squaring Jupiter in Gemini here. And Jupiter is ruling all of these planets that are in Pisces. And then Mercury is ruling that Jupiter. So these two are in mutual reception through that square there. So these two are in a highly dynamic conversation, and they're discussing pretty much all of the things. Both sides of the nodal axis are playing into this. Again, all of the Pisces planets plus this Jupiter. All of that is taking place within the context of the conversation between Mercury and Jupiter here. Mercury does well with details, and it's in a sign of no boundaries between discrete packets of information, nothing that can really be sorted through in any sort of organized sense. And then Jupiter likes to deal with stuff like that. It likes to just ask big questions and not worry about the sorting out of the details of it. And yet it's in this day-to-day, detail-oriented exchange of discrete little packets of information, sign of Gemini. So they're speaking each other's languages. And if you imagine it like, if there are two people, they both have a different native tongue, but they both know each other's language. And for some reason, they're trying to discuss something only using each other's languages and not their native languages. It's like, yeah, the information is going to be exchanged, and there's going to be that increased higher level fascinating information of what's being communicated through the potentially broken languages a bit about the culture from which one is perceiving that language through. So there's actually more that's being discussed than would even necessarily arise within the native tongues. And the information certainly gets across, but it's still just imperfect information, imperfect communication. And again, what's being discussed here is like a lot of high-level topics. So, I mean, just kind of imagining that kind of cultural exchange there, that would be really difficult, but it would push both parties to come to a greater understanding, both of each other's languages, but then also of their own languages and how those kind of interact and play out together. And additionally, just because they're speaking each other's languages doesn't mean that they're in agreement too. So they are favorably disposed to each other. They're both in each other's houses. They're both hosting each other, but they're in houses that they're not comfortable with, for one thing, not fully at least. There's a level of tension or disagreement there with that square. So it's kind of like having your hand forced to have to look at really big questions in your own life, your own values, your spirituality, your ideology, your working life, your relationships, your boundaries, your psyche, things like this, like big, high level, big questions, your identity, what it is that you want to do with your future, your life, what your purpose is, these kind of big questions. It's like your hand is being forced to have to look at this in a completely different way than you typically would. And so it takes up a lot of cycles. And that, I think, is where a lot of the difficulty comes in when we're dealing with these squares between Jupiter and Mercury when they're in each other's signs. We saw this last year a few times where people were trying to get on the same page. They were trying to get things done, and yet it seemed like things just kept arising, kept getting in the way, kept getting misconstrued, so on and so forth, where it required major adjustment and major flexibility. And thank gosh, of course, because this is Mercury and Jupiter, this is all playing out within mutable signs. So they're willing to be flexible with each other. They're willing to see things from each other's perspectives. It's just that it takes so much more work and so many more cycles to accomplish that in this way that's called for during this time. But again, I think also then the rewards are a lot higher because you're able to get a bigger view, a more holistic, complete view of how the details are going to fit into the whole for you and for us on a global level too. So I wasn't expecting to go that deeply into that, but if there's any place to come for an overanalyzation of a Mercury-Jupiter square in each other's signs, it's definitely here. So I'm not at all surprised that I went way too much into that. So now what's interesting too is that as this moon starts to move into Sag, then it's going to create a T-square. And that's going to just heighten the big questions and the disagreement within the discourse or the thought process that's arising here. It's adding an additional layer to it. So debates around this period of time could certainly take center stage. Some people could wind up being pretty argumentative. I would say even just requesting some flexibility on the part of someone else is likely to get that for you. So that's what I would ask for. And then on a personal level, like internally, do try your best to avoid procrastination or analysis paralysis. And focus is likely going to be more difficult during this time. Again, this has to do with the fact that there's a lot more cycles that are required to just take like an overview of any given thing. It's like, what are all of these different components that I don't typically have to consider that I'm needing to think through during this period of time? So because that's going to be arising, unless it's very productive procrastination of, I had these plans for today, but actually a rethink would be really good to make sure that I'm going to stay on the same page with myself about this so that I'm not getting a false start. That would be, I think, kind of the only good procrastination or even analysis paralysis that you could get into during this time. Is just, if you need a big rethink, this is the time to do it. If you don't need a big rethink, I would try to get your mind off of this as much as you can, which is probably not going to be much. So moving on from all of that. So on the 22nd, we have the conjunction of Neptune with the North Node, and this is going to be the mean node here. So this is going to be taking place in a broader period of time. The true node oscillates between different degrees. It goes backward and forward. The mean node just takes the average of all of that so that we get a smooth movement of that nodal axis there. And I'm going to do a whole video on this, so I'm not going to go too deeply into it in this video. But I do want to point out that at this time, we also then have the moon will be in late Sagittarius. And so it's going to be at what we would call the south bending of the nodal axis as it makes this conjunction. So broad overview, profound potential spiritual growth, and kind of like destiny related shifts, like things that arise kind of out of the blue and completely incomprehensibly in terms of the context, I would actually recommend going with it around this period of time because of the fact that Neptune and the North Node can do a big reorientation that's really beautiful. So this could be a turning point also toward more compassionate social values arising in the collective, and additionally themes of unity, but then also potential for like mass confusion or mass idealism. Again, that desire to believe something that very well may not be true, because a lot of where that message is coming from is Mars in Cancer and Uranus in Taurus. And these two aren't even really doing their thing, let alone should they really be leading us in terms of any sort of capital T truth. So that's something to keep in mind, is that both of these are pretty reactionary, and they can go also pretty nationalistic and conflictual and defensive. So that's something to keep in mind, is that there's going to be on a level a desire to get sucked into that by some, and there will be big consequences for that, especially for those people because of the nodal axis conjoining Neptune at this time. There's something karmic that is arising within the culture, and there's going to be consequences around it, and it's tied into these two here with an easy flow, really wanting to believe this. I also would not be surprised to see major storms arising around this period of time. Economic questions arising as well due to the past conjunctions of these two. I'll go more into this in a future video, but then also questions around public discourse rather around social justice, race, gender, class, and things like this in the political arena have arisen the past 2 times as well. And then major blockbusters and cultural phenomena arising big time within the primarily Hollywood, actually. But then also we have seen around periods of time like this shifts toward new scenes and new styles. Like a few back, we saw the rise of punk rock, hip hop, the arena rock. 2 times ago, we saw grunge arise. We saw, indie hitting its peak in the very last one. I'm talking 2008, 1999, 1974, 1958, 1941, 1924, and then I want to say 1906 or 08 are the past periods of time that we've had these Neptune North Node conjunctions. So I'll go more into that in a future video though. And we also see major technological shifts around this time. So again, I mentioned form factors in the year ahead. Again, would not be surprised to see a major new form factor. We saw the World Wide Web in its infancy around the second to last time that we saw this in 1991. And in 2008, we saw the rise of smartphones as well as Facebook and Twitter. We also saw the Bitcoin white paper the last time. And this is also then tying into the eclipse cycles that are going along with this. And this year we are tapping into 1989 and 2007. So again, it's tying into social media, Web 2.0, smartphones, and then internet, World Wide Web, rather, the time prior. So again, would not be surprised to see form factor changes. And it's funny too, because, the whole if you're tuned into my generation of nerds and a little bit before, those of us who were big into the web prior to social media and how we feel about Web 2.0 as being basically the death of the web as we knew it when we were growing up, and that being marked by those periods of time, 2007, 2008, as opposed to 89, 91, when the web was first coming online, so to say. But then now we could see something along the lines of the death of Web 2.0 or something like that. I would not be surprised to see that wind up coming around. So yeah, then on the 23rd of February, we have Mercury trining Mars. So aligning ideas and energies and energy toward action. So the mind and the energy are on a similar page. They're able to function together, but these two are in water signs. We do have to keep in mind. So it's like, it's the pursuit of comfort and care that ultimately is what's driving that. There's like an emotional underpinning to the thought process and to the action, and that is driving it in a similar direction there. Also, during this period of time, on the same day, in fact, we wind up having the moon come into opposition with that Mars. And so it will then also be sextile to Mercury, and it'll form another wedge here. Opposition, sextile, trine. And so that's tying all of this together. It's also heightening that station, because all of this is happening with Mars stationing direct. So that is heightening the tension within the emotion during that time too. So what's interesting is it's like feeling at odds with your energy, and yet your thought process being on the same page as your energy. And the where the problem, so to say, is coming in here is the disagreement between Cancer and Capricorn, right? So there's something about long view. Remember how I was saying there's an emotion that's underpinning that trine between Mars and Mercury. Well, there's that opposition is coming in from that earth sign of Capricorn, is taking that long view. So Capricorn isn't going to act on emotion, but that's kind of coming into conflict with the motivation that is available here. So try not to put the brakes on too much during this time, because if you do, then you're going to feel at odds really with your own energy, rather than aligning the idea and the energy towards something of care and comfort. That's pretty much all that's available to us right now in terms of effectiveness. Yeah, don't just act like in a silly fashion on your energy. Don't just become emotionally reactive. And that's what that moon can bring, is like, make sure that you have your long-term goals in mind when it comes to what you're taking action on, but try not to then let that step on what your motivation actually is with that. So it's a balancing act on this day while we have Mars coming into that station point. I'd also just watch out for injury, because again, when you're at odds with your own energy, it can be a bit of like the left hand not knowing what the right is doing, but in a literal sense. So I would just make sure that you're not pushing and pulling like internally and then in your physical expression, and therefore possibly hurting yourself. Now then on the 25th of February, we have Mercury conjoining Saturn here. So this brings the mind and the focus to the long term and the strategic, but it's in Pisces. So it's a little bit diffuse, even though there's a relatively specific vision that's arising here. It still looks to me like it's something that's off in the distance and that's still being worked out. There's a lot of motivation behind this, though, and a lot of determination. Again, that Mercury is coming straight off of the trine with Mars right into that Saturn. So that can be a little bit uncomfortable, but it's clear on where the energy's at. It's clear on what the goal is. It's just that how it needs to be done, I think, is what's not quite clear here. We do still have that square to Jupiter in Gemini. The ruler of all of those planets in Pisces is in detriment. That Mercury is in detriment. We have to keep that in mind, and in its fall. It's a very uncomfortable Mercury. And then what we're dealing with there is the malefic. So it's like, you know how you feel. You know what you're wanting. You know on some level the steps along that way. But in terms of how, possibly even in terms of why, I think is what looks not clear here. Because there's never going to be perfect clarity when we're dealing with Pisces there. So if during this period of time you wind up feeling lost or melancholic, again, remember, romanticize, accept, allow, push through, not through force, but just through, it's okay, it's all right. I can do my day-to-day thing and to not have to answer the big questions quite yet. But then for others, and this is really going to depend on people's charts and so forth, this could wind up feeling like really inspired, determined, supported, because of the fact that this energy is weirdly aligned, and it is weirdly supportive to goals. It's just that the style or manner of it isn't quite what we would expect with them, with those things being in Pisces and Cancer there. Okay, so lastly, we have the new moon in Pisces is taking place on the 27th of February here. So got a pile up big time going on here. Way too much Pisces energy, even by my standards. So off the bat, in literal terms, because astrology often winds up going pretty literal, water problems. Too much water can be a major problem when we have this much water going on, and then we have Venus and Jupiter both in their detriment there. Like this is an uncomfortable amount of water, and the two benefics are in no position to be able to help with it at all. And not only that, but these two are sextile to each other, Venus and Jupiter here. That's lovely. They're within orb. It's in effect, but this is not going to perfect until June 4th of this year. That's how long this Venus retrograde cycle is going to wind up taking, is that these two will not actually be sextile until Jupiter is right at the end of Gemini, and then finally Venus goes through its cycle and then is at the end of Aries, and then they will finally perfect the sextile in June. Now, what's cool about this is that this new moon is in a trine to Mars here. So it is an agreement, even though there's way too much of that going on here. But it's also in a square to that Jupiter. Now, squares to Jupiter, generally pretty okay. Also, I do have to say that Jupiter being in detriment, it is helped out by the fact that Mercury's in its sign. They're both in each other's signs. They're not an aspect to each other anymore, but it does alleviate to a really strong extent that detriment there. So on a personal level, dreams, aspirations are really taking center stage here and trying to figure out the structure of that. We're dealing with the latter end here now of Saturn in Pisces, which has been trying to figure out how do we structure dreams, how do we structure our aspirations in order to make them real. But there could be some overreach with this much going on in Pisces here. So this is very unbalanced. That's what we have to keep in mind. So on a collective level, certainly inspired new beginnings and thoughtful action. This is, of course, a lot of compassionate energy there. And so we could wind up seeing an expansion of like creative or humanitarian initiatives throughout this period of time. But that will be tempered by this Saturn. Saturn is actually, I think, helping here a decent bit, because this could go just way off into La La Land if we didn't also have Saturn here. It might be fun to go off into La La Land. So yeah, of course, it's a malefic, but it is bringing a lot of grounding to this area where otherwise there would not be really any. So on a personal level, very fertile time for creativity, intuition, spiritual growth. The square to Jupiter can really amplify or expand dreams and like visions for your future and plans and goals that you may have. And then that trine to Mars helps to take action along those lines, helps to take inspired action and heartfelt action. And so you could be deeply inspired, but still struggle with that overextension and the unrealistic expectations of that much Pisces going on here. So the opportunity then is to, manifest a vision with practical steps, tapping into that emotional courage that we see with that Mars in Cancer and a trine to these positions as well as to focus on compassion, healing, and creativity. Those are the opportunities here. But the challenge is to kind of get swept away by like overconfidence or impractical ambitions where where you're thinking, well, the universe is just so wonderful that how could it really anything go wrong? Kind of a thing. And so then collectively, what we're dealing with is efforts toward a goal of a better future that is clashing with or running into a barrier of limitations or restrictions. And I do have to say, it's not time yet for that. And, I hate to say that. This year is going to drive me nuts because we still have Neptune and Pisces. We still have Uranus and Taurus. We're still dealing with a lot of old energy. And we need to let these outer planets move into their new signs before these big, grand future visions are really going to be able to be rooted and to actually take off. So in the meantime, compassionate initiatives, certainly a great way to utilize this energy in the short term, but the seeds planted right now are probably not going to be what's needed once those outer planets shift. So that's something to keep in mind. If things look like there's not enough going on that you would like to see around this time, just give it some time. Things are going to change a lot very shortly. And then, yeah, of course, like I'll always say with Saturn and Mars, both in water signs, and then this way too much water going on here with Pisces, certainly could be major issues related to water. Also, with all this Pisces, and then that Jupiter in the position that it's in right now, as well as a lot of the stuff that's going on with these planets here, it's religious authority, morality, moral relativism, like morality for thee and not for me kind of a thing, where you're not holding yourself to the standards that you're insisting that other people abide by. And then justification of action, the end justifying the means kind of a thing, could certainly arise with this lineup as well. So that's something that we'll need to keep in mind. And then, yeah, there's a bit of still the partisanship or exclusion. Saturn is in the mix here. We've got Venus in detriment, Jupiter in detriment. This Jupiter is going to be pretty open, but these two are certainly not. And these two, not as much as they possibly could be. And they're a little bit limited in what they're capable of accomplishing in these signs anyway. So this could be not good, radical new ideas that are based on us and them, us versus them, being better than them, kind of a really silly mindset. So in terms of angularity, as we can see, this is not terribly far off of the angle over DC. So this is over the west of the US and Canada that this is angular. We have this over Mexico, yes, close to Mexico City, Ireland, Portugal, Spain, Morocco, Mauritania, Mali, Ivory Coast, India, Western China, Eastern Russia, and New Zealand is where this one's going to be angular. So we could see a lot of this arising in a way that is especially significant or especially felt in those areas. But yeah, as I said, very dynamic month. Huge emphasis on Aquarius and Pisces energy throughout this time. So while it's beautiful, it's going to be really important to make sure that we're being practical and that we're also still functioning with all of the Pisces energy, especially for those who aren't the most familiar with this kind of a thing. Boundaries do a load of help when we're dealing with something like this. Knowing where you end and where others begin is going to be a struggle, but it's going to be important. So I think that is pretty much what I have for the month. I'm going to go into the sign by sign here in a moment. But yeah, if you enjoyed this, I really appreciate a thumbs up. It helps me to impress the algorithm. It helps to get the algorithm to spread this video around more, so it helps to grow the channel. And also, I just hit 10,000 subscribers, and I am really blown away by this. I am really, really, really grateful to everyone who's here and who have helped the channel to grow. This is just absolutely a dream for me, and I'm so grateful for all of your support. So yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for the month, and now I'm going to get into sign by sign. Okay, so for Aries rising, we have the full moon taking place in your 11th and 5th houses, which is highlighting creative expression, your personal relationships, your connections with other people. But that tension there is also bringing up questions around finances or self-worth. So that's something that you'll need to keep in mind and keep an eye on around the middle of the month. Now, toward the end of the month, the new moon is going to be taking place in Pisces, which will be your 12th house. And so this is really doubling down on a lot of that Pisces energy, highlighting your subconscious, highlighting your conditioning, and how you perceive of things kind of underneath the surface. And so I would highly recommend setting intentions for spiritual growth and emotional healing around that new moon in Pisces that's right at the end of the month there. There's going to be a lot of subconscious material that you'll be working through this month as we have that pile up in Pisces in your 12th house there. Now, Venus in Aries is going to be, of course, in your 1st house. So this is going to have you very bold in your relationships, but you may certainly need to balance that impulsiveness with the fact that there's some interesting shifts going on, either with regard to material matters or with regard to your sense of self, your sense of security within yourself. So you're making your mark, you're being very bold. And if you wind up having that shaken a little bit by someone around this period of time, you may want to ask yourself, is that something that's coming from you in terms of that shakeability, the fact that you can be, you can have either your confidence shaken or you can feel like you've made a bad investment into a friendship or a connection or something like this? Or is it that that connection is possibly not really serving you all that well anymore? And is it maybe something that you want to take a little bit of distance from? And taking a little bit of distance from things that feel a little bit off really would not be a bad idea, because you have Mars in your 4th house. So that is really pulling you and your motivations toward home, toward family, toward comfort. And so it's encouraging you to address emotional issues, and then also maybe any sort of issues which may arise also within your family. And then Jupiter can definitely wind up overdoing it out in public. So that's why I'm saying, like, it may be good for you to pull back at certain times this month. If you feel at all weird, I would not feel like you should require from yourself any more than that as an excuse to, you know, be a plan canceller and things like that, you know, and just take a little bit of me time during this month here. Because Jupiter being in a square to these placements in your 12th house in Pisces is saying that, like, being out in the world, this is your day-to-day life in the 3rd house, your communications, connecting with others. This can be siblings or peers, neighbors, things like this. And so you could feel like you're pulling from your subconscious or your emotional energy that usually backs you up on things. You're pulling from that reserve in order to fuel those connections. If you feel that way, I would try not to do that. I would try to focus more on reflection and try not to overload yourself with other people's concerns. I think that it may be really wise for you to block out certain periods of time throughout this month to just kind of spend some time with yourself. And I think that's going to be what's most comfortable. Because if you're resisting the fact that you've got a heavy 12th house this month, and then that Mars and Cancer in your 4th, then things look like that's where they start to get a little bit wonky. So that is definitely what I would recommend for you throughout this period of time, Aries. Okay, so for Taurus, we have the full moon taking place in your fourth house and highlighting your 10th house as well. And then that is stirring up changes with regard to yourself and how you present yourself. So this is bringing up questions about family dynamics, your home, your roots. You may be even making some changes around your home or your family around this period of time. And a lot of this is also then playing into like your public reputation. So this is a major push and pull between how do I want to come off in the world? Who am I truly? And then who is it that I'm either wanting or needing to be within the context of my home and my family? Who am I really? Which side of myself do I feel most comfortable with around this period of time? The answer to that is going to be friends, connecting with people, just like those casual relationships that aren't quite so like heavy. If you're able to make time to just have some lighthearted fun throughout this month, I think that's going to go over a lot better because we have Mars in your third house in Cancer here, which kind of requires some connection. It requires some communication. It wants to connect with people. It wants to feel comfortable with the people and the places around it. And then the fact that you're going to have a pile up in your 11th house, it does present a lot of opportunity for networking and things like this. It also can provide new ideas about your goals, your dreams, your vision for the future. And so tapping into those light-hearted relationships that come through with the third house and the 11th house, that is probably going to feel best. And that, I think, is how you're going to feel most like yourself. If you're caught up between who you need to be at home and who you need to be out in your public life in terms of like professional life, then I think there's going to be a lot of tension here and you may wind up feeling pretty uncomfortable. Also, I would recommend taking some time for yourself with Venus in Aries in the 12th. It's like there's nowhere that you can be more yourself than just, by yourself and taking care of your own personal private needs while there's a lot that's going on in your life in these different really significant areas, and then wanting to, in addition to those things, just have a little bit of fun, so make sure that you're balancing things out throughout this period of time. Socializing, really good. Taking some time for yourself, also really good. I would try not to let your family or your professional life define you. That's going to feel really uncomfortable. So yeah, that is pretty much what I have for you, Taurus. Okay, so for Gemini, we have the full moon is in your third house, which is also then highlighting your ninth house and your 12th. So this is encouraging you to connect with your neighborhood and the people around you, but it's very likely that through a dynamic connection with people where you're exchanging ideas, where you're connecting, possibly even debating, that there's something within you that winds up shifting through that process. And it's probably not going to be the most comfortable, but it may be something that's necessary. And for a Gemini rising, this would not be the most out of bounds kind of a situation to arise. Generally enjoying exchange with others anyway, and being able to allow for other people to have different views on things. And being open to reevaluating your views when they may be challenged. So this is also a period of time where you may find it more difficult to focus on study or to focus on, say, reading or things like this. There's just going to be a lot that's going on in the mind, especially around the middle of the month there. Now, the pile up in Pisces is impacting your professional life, your public standing, your reputation, and there could be some minor new beginnings along these lines with that new moon that'll be taking place at the end of the month there. But overall, there's likely to be a lot going on in that part of your life. It's not all going to be just perfect and flowing. There's going to be some hiccups because it's going to be squaring that Jupiter in your first house. But I don't think that any of this is really negative or untoward. It's more along the lines of having a lot to do and not being the most into all of the things that you need to do. but there's opportunity in that nonetheless. So Venus is moving into your 11th house. That is also emphasizing friendships, social groups, and also there could be, though, some like sudden revelations with regard to long-term goals. So this Venus in your 11th is kind of tying into similar themes as the full moon there. And because this Venus is ruling this Uranus as well, there could be some major shifts that come from your subconscious, almost like a dawning realization of something that you're really wanting to do, or even something that you're realizing you're not as into as you thought that you might be. So there may need to be a bit of an adjustment along those lines in terms of goals, possibly even in terms of friendships or social relationships. But I would say it's more likely to be goals because of the fact that you're also getting loaded up on your 10th house there. So the Mars being in a trine to the new moon is helpful for you because Mars has been in the second house throughout a lot of this retrograde. And that can be annoying for finance, but the fact that it'll be in a trine to a new moon that's taking place in your 10th house of, again, reputation, career, public standing, your professional life, this should take the edge off of that Mars, and you may actually have a nice little financial breakthrough along those lines toward the end of the month. Also, Jupiter still being in your first house. This is nice. It's gone direct. So if it feels like things have fallen off in terms of the general good mood or good fortune that you may have been feeling since last summer, if it feels like it's fallen off in recent months, this could have that really starting to spin up again. However, also it can have you spreading yourself too thin. So do try and focus on one thing at a time throughout this period of time as well. Pretty much until the summer when that Jupiter finally moves on, and then you probably will feel less like you're being pulled in all sorts of different directions. And then, yeah, Saturn still being in your 10th house, but now in the context of that pileup, it does encourage that disciplined approach to your career. And it's reinforcing that while we have more coming in to support the career, but the fact that Saturn is here is having you still remain pretty disciplined and responsible along these lines too, not just expecting for things to go really pleasantly, but willing to put the work in toward that end as well. So yeah, that is pretty much what I have for you, Gemini. So for Cancer, this full moon in Leo is taking place in your second house of finance, and it's also highlighting your 8th house of shared resources, dependencies, commitments, partnerships, things like this. And then we also have that in a T-square to Uranus in your 11th house. So this can bring some clarity around your financial situation or your sense of self with regard to others, and especially with regard to others in which you feel like you are invested in some way, not just financially, but even emotionally invested with. And if there is a sense in which you have felt recently an uncomfortable level of dependency either on you or from you to others, that should be sorting itself out around the middle of this month as well. You could also find that there are people around you that are able to offer you surprise opportunities during this period of time that could be really good financially for you or could encourage you to be more independent. Now, Venus in Aries is going to be in your 10th house here, and this is encouraging of your career aspirations, but there still may be issues that arise around your values versus your aspirations around this time too. So that is something that I would keep in mind. Now, Mars has also been in your first house for a lot of its retrograde cycle here, and it will wind up going direct this month. And that'll be just helpful. It should help to cause you to feel empowered to take initiative with regard to some big ideas that are developing for you right now. You're probably not going to be implementing things, but you're going to be taking the first steps to create a solid plan along those lines with the trine from that Mars in your first house to the new moon, which will be taking place in your ninth house there. And there could be a travel opportunity that winds up arising too. Now, Jupiter also in your 12th house could wind up causing you to overcommit to something that is exciting and to draw on some reserves of yours in order to fuel that. So try not to drain yourself through exciting ideas. If you need to say no to certain things, I would embrace that. I would recommend against feeling like you have to overcommit to things. And then in terms of those visions that are coming up with regard to future plans, Saturn remains in Pisces throughout the time where these more idealistic placements, so to say, wind up coming through here as well and stirring up those kind of grand visions. It is keeping that practical. So that should help you to like ground into reality. Okay, what is the plan around this? It's not just a vision. Let's create a plan for when these planets then all wind up moving within the coming months into your 10th house there. That's when you'll start to enact that plan. But yeah, that is pretty much what I have for you, Cancer. So for Leo, this full moon is taking place in your first house of Leo. And that is highlighting questions around yourself, your own personal projects, your own personal goals, your sense of yourself, the way that you approach others as well, and the way that you do relationships, so to say. And the connection there between yourself and others and how you approach them is shaking up to an extent your reputation or your public image. So I think for you, perhaps especially, I would be quite careful around stubbornness or an over fixity, because if this does wind up playing out as a little bit of conflict, there could be something with your career that winds up carrying on from that, where that winds up having an impact then on your career. So being flexible, I think for you is going to be most important during this time. Not like giving up on your dreams or anything like that, but just making sure that you're not ruffling too many feathers. Now, the new moon in Pisces is going to be playing into the pile up in your 8th house. So this is bringing a huge amount of focus to your deep emotional connections, your committed relationships, financial partnerships. If you run a business with someone, that partner in that business there, as well as themes of control and dependency. So this could definitely arise as a problem, dependency. And you could though also find that it's not so much a question of dependency as it is a question of trust. You trust people. And with the North Node moving into your 8th house over the course of the coming year and a half, really, kind of, you're at least asked to evaluate that, think that through. Who do you trust and why? Who do you allow in and why? Do you know the answer to that? Is there a consistent answer to that, or is it more of a vibes thing, which is perfectly fine? But if those themes of dependency and trust wind up arising, I would not shy away from talking it over with friends, though you're not likely to get the answers that you're wanting from them. You're likely to get some really good food for thought from them. Because we also have then during this time and for a little while now, but in a square to these placements, Jupiter in Gemini in your 11th. So friends are beneficial to you around this time, but it can cause some confusion around priorities and commitments and things like that. So now that confusion may be exactly what you need. You know, someone may say something that plants a seed that later on, you know, winds up blooming into a thought or a concept or like a structure around which to establish boundaries. I would try and remain open to friends and what they have to say. I don't think that you'll love it, but I think it'll be productive. And then also definitely trying not to get too feisty with others because of the fact that this could impact your reputation too. Now, Mars has been in your 12th house also for a little while. and it's going to be going direct, which helps. And so that is enhancing your own inner strength. But with Mars in the 12th, while Saturn is in the 8th, you may have been noticing little weird fears that come up, maybe for no reason, you know. That might be kind of confusing. You may be finding like interesting psychological material, you know, that you're kind of having to work through. And I wouldn't shy from that, but I would recommend, if there's a fear response, to not be afraid to look at it straight in the face. It can't really, I don't want to say it can't hurt you, but it's not going to bite. You know, it's not going to probably physically harm you to really look those things in the eye. And if they're coming up around this time, it's probably just best to kind of deal with it while you have all of this access to these houses, which typically we don't. That's in part why the fears tend to hang out in these places. Questions around trust, you know, questions around your conditioning and what's going on beyond the veil, and so on and so forth. These do tend to be kind of hiding spots, and you've got a lot of access to, or much more access to them now than usual. So I would just take the opportunity, you know, it's basically what I'm trying to get at here. But then, yeah, Saturn also encouraging boundaries and a mature approach to commitments. And that's why I was kind of like, if there's a trust issue there, I wouldn't say, oh, yeah, no, the North Node is there. It's saying you should trust people. I don't, I wouldn't say that. I would say that it's asking you to look at that and ask yourself, is there maybe a subconscious thing that you're picking up on about why you don't trust someone? And should you maybe even strengthen your boundaries with regard to some people? That way, you're able to create an environment for yourself going forward where, knowing that you know how to suss that out to your own liking, your own comfort, you're then able to be in a place internally and externally where you are able to trust and open up to people. So I think that those are a lot of the like lessons. It's a lot of like you and your psyche versus other people and theirs, the interaction of that, possible power dynamics along those lines, questions of trust as well. And then also keeping in mind that too much action along these lines, if you're too rigid with this, could have an impact on your reputation. So I would be careful about that. And then also talking things over with friends. I would recommend it, even though I'm going to tell you straight up now that what they say is likely to be helpful, but maybe not exactly what you want to hear, you know? So it looks like an interesting month. It's going to get much, much, much more pleasant in coming months as we start to get more Aries action going on, as this Mars moves on out of your 12th and so forth. But for now, there's a lot of evaluation along those lines. So yeah, that is pretty much what I have for you, Leo. So for Virgo, we have the full moon is taking place in your 12th house, which is also highlighting your 6th and your 9th here. So this is really calling on you to take some time to rest, to take care of yourself around this period of time, and to not hyper focus on trying to get things done, because this could be, it could really put a damper on your state of mind with Uranus in a T square to that in your 9th house there. So taking time out for yourself to explore also your own general interests would be a much better way to utilize this than would be just pushing, and then trying to put aside your own interests and your own well-being for later. So I would front load the rest and interest and study and reading and the things that fascinate you, rather than pushing it off to later. Now, there could be also a disruption with regard to your worldview or beliefs as well around this time, just something to keep in mind. It's likely that this could be around questions of service. So if you participate in charity work or something like that. It could be through that you would wind up running into this, or it could be just straight through self-care, and doing things around the home, like putzing around the home. You could have some epiphanies, whether it be through a podcast or a book you're listening to, or just straight out of your own mind, can also take place when we have 12th house action going on there. Now, the new moon in Pisces is taking place in your 7th house of relationships, partnerships, other people. And so there's likely to be a minor new beginning along those lines. You could wind up meeting someone or connecting with someone that's quite pleasant and compassionate as well. So likely an empathetic connection, but also potentially a very stable connection with Saturn and Neptune also there in that pile up. Now, Venus is in your 8th house. So this is bringing a focus to shared resources, dependencies, commitments, and things like that. So you could wind up learning about some interesting revelation of what's going on with someone else and where they're coming from. And likely that'll be helpful to know, but it could seem a little bit heavy or challenging in the moment there. You may also be called on to help someone. Looking at all of this, I would say that I would think that would be good to help someone who is in need. And of course, if someone is known to be super unreliable and that there's no point, then of course that's a different story. But it looks to me like the way that all of this is playing out during this month, that it's likely that it would pay off for them, and then also for you to feel connected and to feel taken care of there. So Mars in Cancer here is in a trine to these Pisces placements as well. So your connections should be pretty heartfelt, should be very dynamic in terms of the enjoyment of connecting. There could be even an interesting dynamic to those connections, like an emotionality to the conversations, like getting passionate about things that you're discussing with either friends or groups that you're involved with, organizations, so on, colleagues even. And with Jupiter still in your 10th house, it's been here since the last summer, but it's now direct again. So if it's felt like things have been held up a bit there in recent months, that should be able to push forward now, but it will be in a square to these Pisces placements. So that is something to keep in mind, and clarifying your expectation, avoiding miscommunication, avoiding overcommitment or overextension when it comes to your relationships, especially your working relationships. Then that would be the best way to avoid any sort of difficulty with having that Jupiter in that square there. But it should still, as long as you are making sure that those expectations are clear, then that should just continue to help you with regard to your career around this period of time. So that is pretty much what I have for you, Virgo. Okay, so for Libra, the full moon in Leo is taking place in your 11th house of your hopes, aspirations, the groups that you're involved with, your colleagues, friends. And so there should be a kind of dynamic connection to people along those lines, especially in the middle of the month, where you're connecting with other people who are like-minded, with the opposition between your 5th house and your 11th house with this full moon here. But that is in a square to Uranus, which is transiting your 8th house long term, but it's getting triggered by this full moon here. So there could be some challenges or some surprises with regard to shared resources or emotional bonds. So this could certainly play out. Like one specific scenario would be going out, doing something that you love to do with people that you enjoy being around, and then sharing, and someone acting like this is somehow oversharing, and then you feeling like maybe you don't quite trust that person, or them doing what you would perceive as oversharing, and you seeing a side of them that they're revealing that you're not that fond of. So there could be challenges along those lines. This could also then be something like a friend needing help, and you're like, yeah, no, this is a great friend. It's all good. And so you enthusiastically oblige, and then maybe they wind up dropping the ball or something like this. So there could be challenges or surprises along those lines, but there could even be a breakthrough where, connecting with a friend that you trust, you're able to realize, wow, this is someone that I trust a lot and that I can confide in, and that I'm able to get to a point of like a psychological breakthrough because of communicating with them and feeling like feeling seen by them, you know? So, and that I would expect to play out somewhere around the middle of the month. Toward the end of the month, the new moon in Pisces is playing out in your sixth house of tasks, working life, coworkers, employees, your health, things like this, your routine. And so it's highlighting that area of your life. It's likely that there's a lot going on around this time for you that you're having to take care of, and you could push yourself to exhaustion. So that's something that I would really recommend. Just try to take care of yourself, because it's a lot of action for the sixth house. And I'm also looking at it like, so it's tying into this minor grand trine, and the apex of that T square and the minor grand trine, they're both pointing right at Uranus in your eighth. So this could even be like pushing yourself to exhaustion, to like, not like a mental breakdown or something, but kind of, potentially. And that could then also have an impact then on your reputation or your working life. So I would recommend a lot of sleep, as much as you possibly can around this time. If you're able to put off some tasks that are low priority until, say, about a March, we're getting a lot of stuff there. Anything you can push off until like the spring, I totally would. Because you're going to have that Pisces action going on for quite a while. So you could try and front load something like first half of the month. It's not going to be so rough. So if there's something that you can move forward and then move a lot of the rest to the spring, and then make sure you're making time for yourself and for your own energy around the middle toward the end of the month, that would be really, really good. So now Venus is in your seventh house. So people should be approaching generally pretty well for you. It does kind of, spice up partnerships a bit, but there could then, of course, be those surprises that are financial or with regard to emotional commitments. So I wouldn't go headfirst into a relationship with someone that like you don't know that well. That could be a temptation there. And then Jupiter could also wind up tempting you to take on too many tasks, square to this heavy Pisces stuff. This is very enthusiastic. It's like, yeah, no, I can do it. I'm good. I got it. I'm good. But you could really take on too much. So do really try and make sure that you're balanced out with that, and that you're prioritizing your health, because also a lot of weight in this house can also then impact your health. And so that's why I was like side-eyeing a lot of this too. So yeah, Saturn is also pushing you along these lines, and to create a sustainable structure, routine for your daily life. But it's not likely really to work yet. There's just so much going on. It's like, how do you establish a routine when you don't really feel like you have time, So if that's something that is arising, yeah, I would try to uncommit from a lot of things, try and reclaim some of your time so that you're able to work through a reconfiguration of the structure of your routine, given the fact that you probably have a lot more going on in this time than you have in recent months. So yeah, that is pretty much what I have for you, Libra. So for Scorpio, the full moon in Leo is taking place in your 10th house of reputation, public standing, career. And that's also highlighting questions around your home and family with that opposition between your 4th and your 10th. So highlighting professional matters and also work-life balance for sure. But then there's also a disruption with regard to relationships that can come up. So there could be some kind of a shakeup there. This may even be like, again, feeling pulled in a lot of different directions, and then someone making way too big of a deal out of the fact that you literally don't have the time for something. You can't spin all of these plates all the time and keep everyone happy. These are angles in your chart, so they're very important parts of your life, your family, relationships with people, generally speaking, and then your career. Trying to put 100% into all of these things literally never works. So if someone goes a little haywire on you about the fact that you're not able to do that, think that it's fair to say that that's not fair, and you should definitely not be hard on yourself about that. You know, I would request reasonability on their part, and then not stress yourself out any more than what could be taking place with that. So the new moon, though, in Pisces should be really nice for you. This is taking place in your 5th house of like fun, creativity, children, enjoyment, hobbies, interests, fascinations, dating life, things like that. And so this is really also, yeah, self-expression, personal expression. And so this is inspiring creativity, expression, enjoyment. It's spurring you into activity that's fun and into connections that are fun. So this should be really, really pleasant and beautiful as well. And also Venus in Aries is going to be in your 6th house. So this should also have work feeling more fun, like your routine even feeling a little bit lighter. And maybe that's because you're making time for things that are also fun as well, especially toward the end of the month, as we no longer have this T-square looming, but rather than it's fading off and we're starting to get the Sun and Mercury move into the 5th house. It's like, this can feel like there's tension building up to the middle of the month. And then maybe due to, even if someone goes a little wonky and you're like, well, I don't need to prioritize that anymore, you know? And then being like, look, I just need to chill, you know, and then going full on into that mode when the Sun and Mercury move into the 5th of like, I need to make time for fun, because like this is not what life is all about, you know. This isn't all there is to have to focus on, and this doesn't look the most fun too, you know. So if the middle of the month is a little bit stressful, just know that you're getting into a lot more fun toward the end there. So yeah, work relationships too can also be helped a lot by Venus being in that 6th house there. But again, be mindful of the disruptions in your personal and professional relationships with that Uranus. So there may be a weird disruption, but ultimately working relationships and your routine, your daily life should be generally quite enjoyable there. Now, Mars is also in your 9th house, which is, it's driving up a lot of passion around ideas and your worldview and philosophy, and like, oh, isn't that a fun idea to kind of play with? Or isn't that something that I would love to know more about? And that's playing into, it's trying to these placements in your 5th. And I often see fascination play out along these lines. And so having that take place there should be really nice. Like, I think there's something that you're getting really into, that you're really enjoying, and you're really wanting to explore a lot more later in the month here. Now, Jupiter in your 8th house is in a square to these placements. So again, if someone puts pressure on you of like, no, this is your duty to do X, Y, and Z for me, and don't just have fun, you know, I'm not personally into that. And I feel like it looks to me like there's someone showing some true colors around this time. So again, would just not stress yourself out any more than they're going to at some point as well. So There could be an over-idealization of a certain relationship, or creative ventures, sure, yeah, because that is tying into the fifth house. Asking yourself, like, am I having fun? That's going to be a really great question during this month, because I think that's going to answer a lot of bigger questions for you about what it is that you want to prioritize. And I think that you're getting like insights to that around this period of time, that should be really helpful. And yeah, Saturn also here with all of these more inspired or lighthearted placements as well. That's encouraging you to like commit to a passion. That's why I'm saying, like, are you having fun? If you are, I would double down. If you're not, I would really ask, like, what is it that I'm getting out of this if it's not fun? And if the answer is not much, then how much do you really want to invest in it? I think is really ultimately the question that you're being asked, right? So yeah, I mean, it looks like a beautiful month, but there's an interesting dynamic going on here. So yeah, with all of that said, I think that that is pretty much what I have for you, Scorpio. So for Sagittarius, we have the full moon in Leo is taking place in your ninth house of exploration, travel, faraway places, foreign places, education, philosophy, belief system, things like this. And that is also then highlighting your third house of learning, communication, exchange, your neighborhood, siblings, your daily life, generally speaking. And the connection there is disrupting your routine, basically. So yeah, that full moon is encouraging expansion, travel, learning, and it's shaking up your routine somehow. So that could be really good and cool if that's something that you are open to with Sag, prominent in your chart. I would expect that that would be the case. Do keep that in mind. Sometimes routines are necessary. So just something to think about there. Now, the new moon with these placements all piling up in Pisces here, you've got to pile up in your fourth house that we're going to be looking at. So this is a huge, huge emphasis on home and emotional security, family. There's possibly a lot that's going on in your family, a lot that you're needing to deal with when it comes to your family, and different kinds of things too that's playing out in that arena there. Probably getting a lot of mixed messages and maybe not knowing exactly how to respond to all of these different things, especially considering that square to Jupiter in your seventh house. So that can have you over analyzing those family matters or getting a little overexcited and spreading yourself too thin. So relationships and family are demanding like just a huge amount of attention from you throughout this month, or you're spending a lot of cycles analyzing it. So that's just, it's going to be a major theme for the month, and hopefully you're able to sort out some big questions along those lines. Now, fortunately though, Venus in Aries is in your fifth house, and Venus loves to be in the fifth house. Venus likes to have fun. The fifth house is the house of fun, creativity, enjoyment, children, hobbies, interests, creative expression, all of these things that we tend to really enjoy in life. So it's bringing a lot of passion to any sort of creative projects. If you're dating, it's bringing a lot of passion to that kind of a relationship. Even just like friends and people that you enjoy like doing activities with, you can see those in the fifth house as well. And you may see some plans change suddenly with that Uranus being at the apex of both of these triangles here. So plans could definitely wind up changing, like right away. I would try and stay open and flexible along those lines. And then, yes, we have Mars in your eighth house. It's motivating a correction to emotional relationships. And that I'm also seeing is tied into questions of family. So Mars in Cancer in and of itself already is often related to dynamic things that wind up arising within the family because it's in Cancer. It's also then in your eighth house. So it's bringing up kind of psychological undercurrents or questions of dependency and things like that. And it's in that trine to the stuff that's going on in your fourth house. So there's a lot that's being spoken to along these lines, and you may feel the need to remain within some kind of a routine for the sake of the security of your family. And yet you may feel this weird urge underlying that's much more like sharply felt from a place of like an intellectualized place of like, but why should I have to be responsible for all of this? That's calling for liberation. So trying to balance that out, not going all in on one direction or the other, I think would be the best way to just kind of handle that push and pull throughout this month. And then, yeah, Saturn is also, it's been in your fourth house recently, but it's going to be there within the context of that pile up there. So that is still helping you to establish a strong foundation and establish roots, even as there's a lot of questions around that are kind of stirring and that are getting worked up with all of these other placements that are affecting your sense of home or family or roots or whatnot. So, yeah, that is pretty much what I have for you, Sag. So for Capricorn, we have the full moon taking place in your eighth house of shared resources, dependencies, commitments, partnerships as they relate to financial concerns or business concerns. Questions also of trust wind up arising in the eighth house as well. So that full moon is bringing a huge amount of awareness to your resources and others, or to like deep emotional connections and commitments and questions of trust. So it's probably going to be an either or kind of a situation of here's my security, there's you. Do I trust you with regard to my security? And along material or again emotional lines. So that's something that'll very likely be arising during this time. And there's something that is getting shaken up with regard to your creativity or romantic connections or the things that you enjoy through that process. So this could, for instance, be meeting someone and not being sure, like being very interested in them, but maybe not being sure if they're going to be good for you. And just a huge amount of tension that then is building up within you and maybe even within that relationship around those kinds of questions. And that can also then be, in some sense, a weird kind of a muse, where it's just this kind of excited energy that's playing into your own personal sense of interest and fascination with the situation. So the new moon, though, is taking place in your third house of communication, your neighborhood, your locality, your day-to-day life. And so that is encouraging you to work through communication issues, as well as your communication style. So I would definitely recommend a lot of compassion within your communication style during this time. That you could also then find that you are very fascinated with learning about things, like wanting to dive deep into a topic and learn a lot more about it. And that may even be something that's getting spurred on by someone that you're connecting to here. Now, we also then have Venus in Aries is in your fourth house of home and family and roots. So there's likely to be some action taking place there, some focus that is required there. You may be finding that you are enjoying more those relationships there, and that you're feeling more at home or more comfortable within those relationships. You could also be like beautifying the home, decorating, or organizing or something like this as well. And that would be a nice way to utilize that as well. Mars in the seventh house is also encouraging relationships. And again, the apex of the trine from Mars in Cancer in your seventh to this pile up that's going to take place in Pisces in your third. The apex of that is, again, Uranus in the fifth. So there's something going on in your fifth that is impacting like who you're connecting to and how you're feeling about that in terms of your security and trust and things like this. So Mars is also encouraging along those lines, getting emotionally involved with someone there and collaborating with them and sharing ideas and communicating and taking on board new fascinating, bits of information or interests, or even if someone else has a hobby that you're starting to get into, that can have you being pulled into that. I will say, just straight up, if you're dating around this time, then this is going to read as pretty straightforward. This is someone who's introducing just a ton of stuff to you. And even if it's not a great relationship that's super good for you, I think you're still getting something out of it. And I think that it's stirring up feelings in you that probably haven't quite been stirred by others. So take that for what it's worth. It is like Mars in its fall in your 7th, and then Uranus in the 5th. In terms of like a big long-term commitment, if you're dating, I don't think so. But I think that they're stirring up again that fascination in you, and that's valuable in and of itself, even if it's not a long-term thing. So Jupiter, though, is in your 6th house of routine, of health, tasks, work, coworkers, employees, and so forth. So you could wind up overcommitting a lot in terms of learning or community or communication efforts. So you could be like spending too much time communicating with people. Again, straightforward. If you're dating someone, I think that this whole thing this month is just really straightforward. If not, then this is probably going to play out in various other relationships in these kinds of ways, where you could find that you're just maybe drawing some productive energy from work and funneling that into like friends and community connections. Is that the worst thing? Probably not. It's Jupiter here. You're relatively safe along those lines. But it could then have you overextend even when it comes to your with Jupiter here. So just try and stay grounded for sure. Make sure that your goals are realistic. Make sure that you're not overcommitting to certain things, or that you're in a position to cancel if you do. Not all of these things need to be like super, oh my God, don't overcommit. It's like, well, you can probably cancel a lot of plans, and if you do wind up doing that, then, that is what it is. Now, Saturn remains in Pisces here as we get this pile up. And this is grounding a lot of that energy, which is actually pretty helpful. It's giving it a bit of an anchor to work with. And so that is lending some focus to these daily connections. It's helping to some extent with boundaries along those lines. So that square between, Jupiter and Saturn should help to be like, okay, chill out, Jupiter. I know you're excited about this. I know that you're excited about like making your routine, your regular life, like a little bit more jazzed up and exciting, but just keep it in reason, keep it in moderation. But yeah, it looks like an exciting month with some disruptions for sure. But yeah, I would just try and keep things light. I wouldn't overcommit. I would not be planning, 5 years down the line during this month. I would just really enjoy it. But yeah, that's pretty much what I have for you, Capricorn. So for Aquarius here, we have the full moon is taking place in your 7th house of partnerships, relationships, other people. And that is also highlighting you, yourself, your identity, your uniqueness, how you come off to others and how others approach you, basically. And that is somehow disrupting your rootedness or your family or your home life. So matters of relationships and individuality will be stirring up surprises in your home life. When we have these things angular, especially like a full moon in a square to Uranus, this is a lot. And by angular, I mean this is taking place in your 1st house, your 7th, and your 4th. These are called angles. They're associated with really, really important parts of your life that tend to take an outsized focus. So you, other people, especially marriage partner, or other very important people in your life. And then home and family takes place in the 4th. The 10th is also angular. That's like career. So we can wind up feeling like I need to give 100% to me. I need to give 100% to my partner. I need to give 100% to my children. And it's like, well, you're at 300% at this point. So clearly that's not going to work. You're going to need to prioritize here. You're not going to be able to make everyone happy all the time during this month. And so by understanding that and being as flexible as you possibly can with that, you're less likely to be completely taken off guard by whatever surprise this could potentially be. In such a case, it's like I feel like we can get out ahead of these things and then turn a surprise into, okay, well, that's pretty cool. So for instance, just as like one concrete example, you've recently had Pluto move into your first house. This is a really big transit. It's going to be going on for 20 years, but it's been inching into your first house. That's a lot to deal with as it is. You're changing. If you're married and say you have or don't have kids, whatever, not to whatever your kids, but either way, say you're in like a romantic relationship, you may need to communicate to your partner. I mean, I'm feeling like a little bit weird recently. Like there's a lot that's going on. Like I'm going through a lot of changes, like maybe some of my goals or who it is that I want to be, what it is that's motivating me has been kind of going through a transformation around this time. And it's a lot to work through on my own. And so I hope that you can kind of help me with not getting overwhelmed with that by maybe could you help me out with this thing that's usually my responsibility within the context of our parenting together or within the context of our living together, kind of a thing. Surprise could, in such a case, very well be, yeah, totally, of course, that's fine. I'm understanding of that, and I'll take care of that for you. Maybe they know a better way to take care of something. You may be surprised along those lines, and that's a pleasant surprise. However, if you are fixed in, no, I'm going to give 100% to all of these things, I'm good. I'm going to ignore the fact that Pluto's been like all up in my business recently, and I'm just not going to address it, and then getting frustrated with your partner, and then there being like a fight within the home or something like this. So sometimes I do really feel like we can get out ahead of a transit and turn it a little bit more, not just like make it more positive, but the point of getting out ahead of it is so that you have a little bit more control over how it winds up playing out, rather than ignoring that something's coming up. So there is a surprise. I would recommend making sure that you're on the same page with other people and that your expectations are clear and that what each of you is feeling like you're going through in terms of like, how many spoons do you have? I'm, a few annoyances away from a breaking point where I'm just like, you know what, screw this day, I'm going to go take a nap, kind of a thing. Being really clear about that, I think, is going to be just absolutely the best way to handle this. Even if you're not in a romantic partnership, just with other people in your life, just making sure that those expectations are clear is going to give you a lot more of a handle on whatever surprise could arise from this full moon, that super, super dynamic full moon that's coming up and that's angular for you. The new moon, though, is in Pisces. That's going to be taking place in your second house. You're going to have a huge pile up in your second house around this time. So one good thing is if there's been financial frustrations recently, just from the fact that you've got Saturn here. Saturn can sometimes be a little annoying to have in your second house. It can feel like, man, I really have got to work for my money, right? And so having extra little buddies, little helpers in that house could actually be helpful. There could be an indication of increased streams of revenue, income streams. It could be like that money winds up coming through something in your life. If you're Aquarius rising, for instance, then this could be through, it could be through a partner. It could be through here? A hobby or uh, like an inheritance, or again, partner connection to someone. So there could be more money coming through, and it may be through like a side way like that as well, of like a side hustle or a connection that you have with someone. This month and next month, as we start to get into Pisces season, that should help actually to alleviate some of the working a lot and feeling like, I know that the reward is there, like I'm fine, I'm comfortable, whatever, but really feeling the grind of it. There's less grind when you've got more buddies in this house than just Saturn and Neptune there. Setting intentions with that new moon also around money and your sense of security in yourself, even on an internal level. New streams of income could arise. I probably should have worded this better. It encourages intentions around money, and that could bring new expenses. So I worded this wrong, but there could then also, yes, be also additional expenses. So that is something to keep in mind. Even if there's new revenue streams, you may find that similarly, with Saturn still there, then there's additional expenses that wind up arising. It's like, it's better to have more there if you're going to have Saturn there, as long as it's not Mars, but it does bring more of a dynamic energy, you know? So there's more that's contributing to your security, but then there's also more that you're feeding into with that. Mars, yes, is in your 6th house. So this is your house of like routine work, tasks, the things you do, coworkers, employees, and your health. So with Mars here, it's likely that recently and then going forward for a bit, it's going to go direct, so possibly even more so. There's much to do, a lot to do. So the risk with Mars is getting frustrated. And that's kind of like what I was getting at, where feeling like I can't be all of this to all of these different aspects of my life, and then getting frustrated. It's kind of similar when you have Mars in the 6th house, kind of whatsoever, especially though when it's in Cancer. Pay attention to your energy levels and try to really honor that. Try not to grind, hustle, 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 and not let yourself take the breaks that you know that you need. Because, yeah, you're likely to do that effectively until possible like health effects from that. So also the frustration can even become, you know, where you're holding tension internally. And that's one thing that Mars in Cancer does as well. So I would watch out for that. Make time for yourself, you know, make your expectations clear with others. Make sure that you're on the same page in terms of what you're capable of doing, and understand yourself, that you're just a person, you know, and there's only so much that you can do. So Jupiter is in your 5th house. That's very lovely. That could be also a bit of the like new expenses thing. So another example, side hustle, working out, say it's from a creative source because of the fact that Mercury is moving into this house. That would be your 5th house ruler transiting your 2nd house. So that's why I was saying, like, could be through a hobby or something. You have Jupiter in that house. But the way that this could play out would be like, okay, I've got this side hustle from a hobby that I have, and I'm going to take that money and invest it right back into that hobby. That is wise, but try not to overdo it. Because Jupiter, especially when it's in a square, can definitely overdo things. So also try not to burn the candle at both ends with this kind of a thing. Mars in the 6th, all this energy in the 2nd. That T square, you know, that was happening in the middle of the month. And then the fact that you've got Jupiter in the 5th, that's a lot of burning the candle at both ends or more, you know, kind of energy there. So yeah, financial planning, still a thing. That discipline of Saturn saying, hey, work hard, and yeah, you've got security. It might not be that fun, you know, it might feel like you're being under rewarded. It helps still. It is a good lesson to take on, and it is still there. So that should also help to temper some of that, like, oh man, I just made a bunch of money and I'm gonna blow it, and it's gonna be fun, kind of a thing. Saturn can really put the brakes on that. So that, I think, pretty much is what I have for you, Aquarius, for February here. So for Pisces, last but not least, my fellow fishies, we have the full moon is taking place in your sixth house of routine, tasks, health, working life, coworkers, employees. And it's also highlighting questions of health, self-care, taking care of yourself, boundaries and priorities along those lines. And there's a surprise that is coming up in your daily environment, possibly in communication as well, with regard to what's going on around this full moon. So yeah, healthy spiritual versus mundane balance. Take care of yourself around this time. Try not to go overboard with work. Something about that dynamic that's going on there that is stirring up some surprise in communication or trips. Worst case scenario, I'm going to give you a terrible example of like how this could wind up. Let's say you don't take care of yourself and you're like, I've got to get to work. I've got to focus up because I've been conditioned, subconsciously to feel like my value is my ability to work. I'm running late and I need to get there on time because somehow for me, it's really important that I'm there 5 minutes early every time. Rushing, rushing, rushing. This could be like a car accident with Uranus at the apex of a T square in your third house. So something to think about. Definitely want to maintain that balance. Make sure that you're well enough rested. Let the little things slide. You don't need to be perfect. Otherwise, like on a positive level here, if you do take time out for yourself for like reconnecting with yourself, you could find that, for instance, if you're like, I'm going to read a book or whatever, you could find something really, really surprising in the context also of a book or of a communication that you have with someone that is like, oh, that's such a cool idea. Or, man, that's something that I've always believed, but I didn't really know how to articulate. And now I have it like in words in front of me. And it's, that kind of moment when you run across something like that. So you can have it one way or another. And of course, there's so many other ways that this could wind up playing out. But there is a call for you to balance out your mundane life with your health, both internal and then your physical health. Also, some sort of a surprise that's coming through with regard to either communication, something that you're learning, or the space, the place around you within which you are functioning. So this can sometimes play out as like the office. It can be a school. It can be your grocery store. It can be the road on which you commute. It can be your neighborhood, the spaces around you, basically. There's some sort of a surprise coming through that it might be it might be pleasant, it might be not so pleasant. All of this stuff here is kind of neutral, except the fact that it's heightened by that T square. So middle of the month is when I would expect for that to play out. So the new moon is taking place within the context of a major pileup in Pisces. I assume that you were quite familiar with this kind of energy. So I think that for those of us who are, it's probably going to feel a little bit more normal for us. But you could definitely utilize it as an opportunity to like redefine yourself, redefine your personal goals and who it is that you want to be, how it is that you want to come across. You may even be changing up your manner of doing something, the way in which you do something in a nice way. And that in and of itself could then even be impacting your work and your health, both internally and externally, too, with Uranus at the apex of both of these triangles here. So yeah, knowing your own priorities, knowing your own limits, not exceeding those, not prioritizing little silly rules for yourself that other people don't really care about, but that it's like, no, I'm holding myself to this kind of a thing. I think that that's actually feeding into something broader that's really nice. It's like it's impacting the way that you express yourself creatively and in terms of your mundane life by having, you know, Mercury and the sun and then the moon come around and all join up in Pisces here. So that's really cool. Probably like major redefinition of yourself that's not so like it's not this heavy thing, you know, because this is your fifth and your third that are also playing along these lines. It's also kind of redefining your family relationships as well. If family is kind of like, why are you different? I wouldn't take that much to heart. I would, you know, just kind of either explain or just not worry about it much. But they may even spur you to make some of these changes too. Yeah, that looks really nice. It's like a new beginning of you yourself with that new moon in Pisces, of course. So Venus is in your second house. This is really nice and helpful financially. And it can encourage you to take action to make that a more pleasant thing for you to be dealing with here. So, I mean, for instance, it could be being bold and being like, I don't need this and this and this subscription. I'm going to do this, and this way. And then I have more money for me, or something along those lines. It could even also have you pursuing a creative hobby that you want to monetize somehow as well. And that should also go over quite well too. Now, yeah, Mars in your fifth house is really wonderful as it is in a trine to these Pisces placements here. So very inspiring, pushing you to pursue enjoyment and to pursue greater self-expression and even emotional expression and being more comfortable with that yourself, emotionally evocative and to be comfortable with that. So yeah, Jupiter creating tension between like inner growth and external expectations here. But yeah, stay true to yourself because you can be going through something really beautiful around this time. And I would kind of brush off anything that's really calling that into question. And yeah, Saturn is also here. So continuing to add structure to you in this kind of redefinition. It's like creating a form around which to define that for yourself. So adaptability, staying grounded, definitely encouraged, and then focusing on what it is that you really want again, and like who it is that you want to be. You're able to define that in this period of time on a level that's really, really quite rare. So yeah, I think that is pretty much what I have for you, Pisces, around this time. It looks like a really beautiful month for you. So that is what I have for you, Pisces, and that is what I have for everyone. So thank you all so much for being here. I really appreciate you all so much again. And yeah, I will see you in the next video. Do be good. Bye.